The morning sun cast long shadows across the grand courtyard of Kensington Palace, as 8-year-old Prince George walked slowly toward the main entrance. His small shoulders carried an invisible weight that seemed far too heavy for someone his age. The young prince had witnessed something the night before that would change everything. It was a typical Tuesday when Prince George noticed something unusual about one of the guards, stationed outside his family's residence. The guard, a man named Thomas Mitchell, had been serving the royal family for over 15 years. Thomas was known for his unwavering dedication and perfect posture, never once leaving his post during his shift. But today, something was different. Prince George had developed a habit of observing the guards during his daily walks around the palace grounds. He found their discipline fascinating and often wondered what thoughts crossed their minds as they stood motionless for hours. Thomas had always been his favorite to watch because of his kind eyes that would occasionally twinkle when he noticed the young prince nearby. The previous evening, Prince George had been unable to sleep. The stress of upcoming royal duties and the constant pressure of being in the public eye had been weighing heavily on his young mind. He had wandered to his bedroom window that overlooked the courtyard, seeking comfort in the familiar sight of the guards maintaining their vigil. What he saw made his heart sink. Thomas, the steadfast guard who never showed emotion, was quietly crying. The tears rolled down his weathered face as he maintained his rigid stance, but Prince George could see the pain etched in every line of his expression. The guard's hands trembled slightly as he gripped his ceremonial weapon, and his breathing appeared labored. Prince George pressed his face against the cool glass of the window, watching this private moment of anguish. He had never seen an adult cry like this, especially not someone who represented strength and protection. The sight stirred something deep within the young prince, a feeling he couldn't quite name but understood instinctively. Throughout the night, Prince George couldn't shake the image from his mind. He lay in his ornate bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand what could cause such pain in a man who seemed invincible. The questions swirled in his head like autumn leaves caught in a whirlwind. Was Thomas hurt? Was he sad about something at home? Did he need help? As dawn broke, Prince George made a decision that would surprise everyone around him. He would not speak about what he had seen, but he would act. The young prince understood, with wisdom beyond his years, that sometimes actions speak louder than words. He would find a way to help Thomas without embarrassing him or drawing unwanted attention to his moment of vulnerability. Prince George dressed carefully that morning, choosing his clothes with particular attention. He selected a simple blue sweater and dark trousers, nothing too formal or attention-grabbing. He wanted to appear approachable, not princely. As he prepared for the day, he thought about his grandfather's words about leadership and compassion, lessons that suddenly felt more relevant than ever before. The palace staff noticed something different about Prince George that morning. He moved with a new sense of purpose, his usual playful demeanor replaced by a quiet determination. His nanny, Maria, commented to the other staff members that the young prince seemed to have grown up overnight, though she couldn't pinpoint exactly what had changed. As Prince George made his way through the palace corridors, he passed portraits of his ancestors, kings and queens who had ruled with both power and grace. He wondered if they had ever faced moments like this, times when they had to choose between speaking up and taking quiet action. The weight of his royal lineage felt different now, not burdensome but empowering. The marble floors echoed with his footsteps as he approached the main entrance where Thomas would be stationed. Prince George's heart raced with nervous energy, but his resolve remained firm. He had no detailed plan, only an overwhelming desire to ease the suffering he had witnessed. The young prince understood that sometimes the most powerful gestures are the simplest ones, born from genuine caring rather than grand declarations. Prince George stepped into the courtyard and immediately spotted Thomas at his usual position near the ornate iron gates. The guard stood tall and rigid, his red uniform immaculate despite the emotional turmoil Prince George had witnessed the night before. The morning light revealed the subtle signs of Thomas's distress that others might miss, but the young prince's observant eyes caught them all. The guard's eyes were slightly red and puffy, though he had clearly tried to conceal this with cold water. His usual confident stance had a barely perceptible slump to it, and his grip on his ceremonial rifle seemed tighter than necessary. Most telling of all, Thomas avoided making eye contact with anyone, keeping his gaze fixed straight ahead with an intensity that suggested he was fighting to maintain his composure. Prince George approached slowly, his mind racing with possibilities. He had considered and rejected dozens of ideas during his sleepless night. Should he ask Thomas directly what was wrong? Should he tell his parents? Should he pretend he hadn't seen anything? None of these options felt right to the young prince, who possessed an intuitive understanding of human dignity that surprised even himself. As he drew closer to Thomas's position, Prince George noticed other details that painted a picture of a man struggling with overwhelming personal difficulties. The guard's usually spotless boots showed signs of hasty polishing, suggesting he had been rushing that morning. His breathing pattern was irregular, the kind that comes from someone trying to suppress strong emotions. Most heartbreaking of all, Thomas's hands showed the telltale signs of someone who had been crying, slightly swollen and red around the knuckles where he had likely wiped away tears. Prince George stopped about 10 feet away from Thomas and did something completely unexpected. Instead of walking past as he usually did, the young prince sat down on the stone steps leading to the palace entrance. He pulled out a small sketchbook and colored pencils that he always carried with him, a habit encouraged by his art tutor who believed that drawing helped develop both creativity and observation skills. The act of sitting down was deliberate and meaningful. In the rigid protocol of palace life, Prince George's decision to remain in the courtyard was unusual. Guards were trained to maintain their posts regardless of circumstances, and the presence of a royal family member for an extended period created an interesting dynamic. Thomas couldn't leave his position, but he also couldn't ignore the prince's presence. Prince George began to draw, but not randomly. He started sketching the courtyard, capturing the beauty of the ancient stone architecture and the carefully maintained gardens. His drawing style was simple but expressive, the work of a child who saw the world with fresh eyes and an open heart. As he worked, he would occasionally glance up at Thomas, not staring, but acknowledging his presence with small, respectful nods. The other palace staff began to notice this unusual scene. Maria, Prince George's nanny, appeared at one of the windows, clearly puzzled by the prince's behavior. She had expected him to complete his usual morning walk and return for breakfast, but instead, he seemed content to remain in the courtyard indefinitely. The head of security, a stern man named Captain Williams, also took note of the situation and began monitoring it carefully. Thomas, meanwhile, was experiencing a range of emotions as he stood at his post. The guard was touched by Prince George's presence but also concerned about protocol. He had been trained never to engage in conversation with royal family members unless specifically addressed, and he certainly couldn't abandon his post to check on the young prince. Yet something about Prince George's quiet companionship felt comforting in a way Thomas couldn't explain. As the minutes passed, Prince George continued his drawing, adding details to his sketch with careful concentration. He drew the elaborate gates, the ceremonial guard posts, and the beautiful architecture that surrounded them. But most importantly, he began to include Thomas in his drawing, capturing not just his physical appearance, but somehow conveying the dignity and dedication that defined the guard's service. The young prince's presence began to have a calming effect on Thomas. The guard found that focusing on maintaining proper protocol in front of Prince George helped distract him from whatever personal crisis had brought him to tears the night before. The simple act of being seen and acknowledged by someone who clearly cared made Thomas feel less alone with his troubles. Prince George worked on his drawing for over an hour, far longer than anyone expected. He added small details like birds in the trees and clouds in the sky, creating a complete picture of that moment in time. But more than creating art, he was creating a connection, building a bridge of understanding between himself and Thomas without saying a single word. The unusual scene began to attract attention from other guards and staff members, all of whom recognized that something significant was happening, even if they couldn't quite understand what it was. The young prince's quiet determination and obvious care for Thomas's well-being created an atmosphere of respect and compassion that seemed to fill the entire courtyard. As Prince George continued his silent vigil in the courtyard, the atmosphere around the palace began to shift in subtle but noticeable ways. Word of the young prince's unusual behavior spread quietly among the staff, creating ripples of curiosity and concern throughout the grand building. Everyone wanted to understand what had prompted this break from routine, but no one dared to interrupt what clearly seemed to be an important moment. Thomas, still maintaining his rigid stance at the gate, found himself profoundly moved by Prince George's persistent presence. The guard had served the royal family for 15 years, witnessing countless formal ceremonies and official events, but he had never experienced anything quite like this. The simple act of being seen and acknowledged by the young prince without judgment or expectation touched something deep in his wounded heart. The source of Thomas's distress was a deeply personal tragedy that he had been struggling to bear alone. His elderly mother, who had raised him as a single parent after his father's death in military service, had been diagnosed with a terminal illness just days before. The doctors had given her only weeks to live, and Thomas felt helpless watching the woman who had sacrificed everything for him slowly fade away. His tears the previous night had been for her, for himself, and for the overwhelming feeling that he couldn't be in two places at once. Prince George, though unaware of the specific details of Thomas's pain, seemed to sense the depth of the guard's suffering. The young prince had a remarkable ability to read emotions and respond with appropriate compassion, a gift that his tutors and family members had often noted. As he worked on his drawing, he would occasionally look up at Thomas with eyes full of understanding and support. The drawing itself was becoming something special. Prince George had captured not just the physical details of the courtyard, but somehow managed to convey the emotion of the moment. His artistic interpretation showed Thomas not as a rigid, emotionless guard, but as a human being worthy of respect and care. The young prince had drawn small details around Thomas that suggested warmth and humanity. Birds landing near his feet, flowers blooming nearby, sunshine highlighting his face. Captain Williams, the head of palace security, found himself in an unusual position. Protocol dictated that he should probably encourage Prince George to move along with his daily routine, but something about the scene made him hesitate. The captain was a practical man who had spent his career focusing on rules and procedures, but even he could recognize that something meaningful was happening in the courtyard that morning. Maria, Prince George's nanny, had been watching from the window with growing amazement. She had cared for the young prince since he was a baby, and thought she understood his personality completely. But this display of mature compassion and emotional intelligence surprised even her. The way Prince George had recognized someone's pain and responded with such thoughtful action suggested a depth of character that promised great things for his future role as a leader. Other members of the palace staff began to gather at various windows and doorways, drawn by curiosity about the unusual scene. The kitchen staff paused in their breakfast preparations. The housekeeping team slowed their morning routines, and even the administrative personnel found reasons to peek into the courtyard. Everyone sensed that they were witnessing something that would be remembered and talked about for years to come. Thomas, aware of the growing attention, felt a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment. He appreciated Prince George's gesture more than he could express, but he also worried about becoming the center of unwanted attention. The guard had always prided himself on being professional and invisible, doing his job without fanfare or recognition. Now, through no fault of his own, he found himself at the center of a situation that was attracting notice from throughout the palace. Prince George seemed to understand Thomas's discomfort and made a subtle adjustment to his approach. Instead of continuing to focus obviously on the guard, the young prince began to incorporate other elements of the courtyard into his attention. He would spend time drawing the architecture, then the gardens, then return to adding details to Thomas's figure. This rotation of focus allowed Thomas to feel less scrutinized, while still maintaining the connection that had been established between them. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, casting different shadows across the courtyard and changing the quality of light that illuminated the scene. Prince George adjusted his drawing accordingly, showing an artistic sensitivity that impressed the adults watching. But more than his artistic skill, it was his emotional maturity and genuine concern for another person's well-being that captured everyone's attention. As the unusual morning continued, it became clear that Prince George had no intention of ending his vigil quickly. The young prince seemed prepared to remain in the courtyard for as long as necessary, committed to providing whatever comfort his presence could offer to Thomas. This determination, combined with his obvious care and respect for the guard's dignity, created an atmosphere of profound humanity in the midst of the formal palace environment. By mid-morning, Prince George's quiet demonstration of compassion had created an unprecedented situation at Kensington Palace. The young prince had been sitting in the courtyard for nearly 3 hours, steadily working on his drawing while maintaining his silent support for Thomas. The guard, despite his training to remain emotionally detached during duty, found himself profoundly affected by this sustained display of human kindness. The palace's daily routine had begun to adjust around this unusual scene. Staff members found themselves moving more quietly through the corridors that faced the courtyard, instinctively recognizing that something sacred was taking place. Even the gardeners, who normally would have been busy with their morning maintenance tasks, postponed their work in the immediate area to avoid disturbing the profound moment unfolding between the prince and the guard. Thomas's emotional state had gradually stabilized throughout the morning, though not because his personal crisis had been resolved. Instead, Prince George's unwavering presence had provided him with an anchor of human connection that helped him process his grief and fear more effectively. The guard found that knowing someone cared enough to simply be present made his burden feel less overwhelming. Even though no words had been exchanged, Prince George's drawing had evolved into something extraordinary. What had started as a simple sketch of the courtyard had become a detailed artwork that captured not just the physical environment, but the emotional atmosphere of the morning. The young prince had somehow managed to convey through his colored pencils the sense of dignity, compassion, and human connection that defined the moment. His artistic interpretation showed Thomas not as a uniformed figure, but as a person deserving of respect and care. The attention of senior palace staff had been drawn to the situation, including Prince George's parents. However, rather than intervening immediately, they chose to observe and understand what their son was doing before taking any action. They recognized that Prince George was demonstrating remarkable emotional intelligence and maturity, qualities that would serve him well in his future role as a leader. Captain Williams faced an increasingly difficult decision about protocol. While there were no specific rules being broken, the extended presence of a royal family member in the courtyard was creating an unusual situation that didn't fit standard procedures. However, the captain also recognized that forcing an end to the scene might damage something beautiful and meaningful that was taking place. His years of military service had taught him to recognize genuine leadership when he saw it, and Prince George's actions demonstrated a type of leadership that couldn't be taught in any classroom. As the morning progressed, other guards on duty began to take notice of what was happening with Thomas and Prince George. Word spread quietly through the security ranks about the young prince's extraordinary gesture of compassion. Many of the guards had served for years without receiving much personal recognition or acknowledgement of their individual humanity. Seeing one of their colleagues treated with such obvious care and respect by a member of the royal family created a ripple effect of appreciation throughout the security team. Thomas himself was experiencing a complex range of emotions as the hours passed. His initial surprise at Prince George's presence had given way to deep gratitude, but he also felt the weight of responsibility that came with being the focus of such attention. The guard understood that his response to this situation would be remembered and discussed among his colleagues for years to come. He wanted to honor Prince George's gesture while maintaining the dignity and professionalism that his position required. The young prince seemed to understand the delicate nature of the situation and continued to handle it with remarkable sensitivity. Rather than making grand gestures or obvious displays of attention, Prince George maintained his quiet presence in a way that supported Thomas without embarrassing him. The prince's approach demonstrated an intuitive understanding of human psychology and social dynamics that impressed everyone who witnessed it. Maria, watching from the window, realized that she was observing a defining moment in Prince George's development as both a person and a future leader. The nanny had seen many examples of the prince's kindness and intelligence, but this sustained demonstration of mature compassion suggested depths of character that promised great things for his future. She made a mental note to document this day carefully, recognizing that it would likely be referenced in future discussions about Prince George's preparation for leadership. The atmosphere in the courtyard had taken on an almost reverent quality. The morning light continued to shift and change, but the connection between Prince George and Thomas remained constant. Other staff members found themselves moved by the scene, even though they could only observe from a distance. Many later commented that witnessing this interaction reminded them of the best aspects of human nature and the power of simple compassion to make a meaningful difference in someone's life. As the unusual morning continued, it became clear that Prince George's actions were having an impact far beyond just comforting Thomas. The young prince's demonstration of empathy and leadership was inspiring everyone who witnessed it, creating a ripple effect of kindness and consideration throughout the palace community. The turning point came when Prince George quietly stood up from his position on the stone steps, carefully closing his sketchbook and gathering his colored pencils. Thomas, who had been acutely aware of the prince's every movement throughout the morning, felt a sudden pang of loss as he realized their shared vigil might be coming to an end. The guard had found unexpected comfort in the young prince's presence, and the thought of returning to his solitary struggle with grief felt overwhelming. But Prince George wasn't leaving. Instead, he approached Thomas's position with slow, deliberate steps, carrying his completed drawing. The young prince's face showed a mixture of determination and gentle kindness that had become his signature expression throughout the morning. As he drew closer, Thomas could see that the sketchbook contained something special, though he couldn't yet make out the details. Prince George stopped directly in front of Thomas, close enough to speak quietly without being overheard by the growing number of observers. For the first time that morning, the young prince looked directly into Thomas's eyes, and what the guard saw there was pure compassion and understanding. It was a look that seemed to convey everything that words could never adequately express about human connection and shared suffering. Without saying anything, Prince George opened his sketchbook and turned it so that Thomas could see the drawing he had been working on for hours. The artwork was breathtaking in its emotional honesty and artistic sensitivity. The young prince had captured not just the physical details of the courtyard and Thomas's position, but had somehow managed to convey the dignity and humanity of the guard's service. The drawing showed Thomas not as a rigid, uniformed figure, but as a person deserving of respect and care. The most remarkable aspect of the drawing was how Prince George had incorporated elements that suggested hope and support around Thomas's figure. Small details throughout the artwork, birds perched nearby, sunlight breaking through clouds, flowers blooming at the base of his post, all combined to create an image that acknowledged both struggle and the possibility of comfort. It was the work of someone who understood that acknowledging pain was the first step toward healing. Thomas's eyes filled with tears as he looked at the drawing, but these were different tears than those he had shed the previous night. These were tears of gratitude and recognition, the emotional response of someone who had been truly seen and valued by another human being. The guard had never expected that his moment of private anguish would lead to such a profound demonstration of compassion from the young prince he was sworn to protect. Prince George then did something that no one expected. He carefully tore the drawing from his sketchbook and held it out toward Thomas. The gesture was simple but profound, offering the guard a tangible reminder of this moment of connection and support. The young prince's eyes never left Thomas's face as he waited for the guard to accept his gift. Thomas faced an agonizing decision. Palace protocol strictly forbade guards from accepting gifts or personal items while on duty, and engaging in extended personal interaction with royal family members was strongly discouraged. However, refusing Prince George's heartfelt gesture would be equally inappropriate and potentially hurtful to the compassionate young prince, who had spent his entire morning providing comfort. The guard's training ward, with his human instincts as he stood frozen, looking at the offered drawing. Around the courtyard, observers held their breath, recognizing that this moment would define not just the relationship between Prince George and Thomas, but would set a precedent for how such situations might be handled in the future. The tension was palpable as everyone waited to see how this unprecedented situation would be resolved. Captain Williams, watching from his position near the main entrance, realized that he needed to make a decision that balanced protocol with human decency. The captain had spent years enforcing rules and maintaining proper procedures, but he also recognized that some moments transcended ordinary regulations. Prince George's gesture was so pure and well-intentioned that preventing it would serve no useful purpose and might damage something beautiful that had emerged from genuine compassion. Prince George continued to hold out the drawing, his young face showing patience and understanding. The prince seemed to recognize the difficult position he had placed Thomas in, but his expression suggested that he believed some things were more important than rules and procedures. The young prince's commitment to offering comfort and support appeared unwavering, regardless of the complications it might create. The silence in the courtyard stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Thomas looked at the drawing, then at Prince George's expectant face, then back at the artwork that captured his dignity and humanity so beautifully. The guard realized that this moment would define not just his own character, but would also influence how Prince George understood the balance between compassion and duty that would guide him throughout his life. Finally, Thomas made his decision. With a slight nod of acknowledgement to Captain Williams, who responded with an almost imperceptible gesture of permission, the guard carefully reached out and accepted Prince George's drawing. The exchange was handled with such dignity and respect by both participants that even the most protocol-conscious observers felt that the right choice had been made. The moment Thomas accepted Prince George's drawing marked a profound shift in the atmosphere throughout Kensington Palace. What had begun as a simple act of compassion had evolved into something that would be remembered and discussed for years to come. The exchange between the young prince and the grieving guard had demonstrated that genuine, human connection could transcend even the most rigid protocols and formal boundaries. Thomas carefully folded the drawing and placed it in his uniform pocket close to his heart. The symbolic weight of this action was not lost on anyone observing the scene. By accepting Prince George's gift, the guard had acknowledged not just the young prince's compassion, but had also accepted the comfort and support that the gesture represented. For Thomas, carrying Prince George's drawing would serve as a tangible reminder that he was not alone in his struggle with his mother's terminal illness. Prince George stepped back from Thomas's position, but his expression showed deep satisfaction with the outcome of their interaction. The young prince had accomplished exactly what he had set out to do without saying a single word. Through patient presence, artistic expression, and genuine caring, he had managed to provide comfort to someone who was suffering while maintaining the dignity and respect that the situation required. Captain Williams approached the scene with measured steps, recognizing that his response to this unprecedented situation would set important precedents for future interactions between royal family members and palace staff. The captain had witnessed many examples of leadership during his military career, but Prince George's demonstration of emotional intelligence and compassionate action impressed him more than any formal ceremony or official event he had ever observed. The captain's decision to allow the exchange between Prince George and Thomas reflected his understanding that true leadership often requires the wisdom to know when rules should be applied flexibly in service of higher principles. By permitting the interaction to conclude naturally, Captain Williams had shown that compassion and human decency could coexist with proper protocol when handled with appropriate sensitivity and respect. Other guards throughout the palace had been quietly following the developments in the courtyard, and news of Prince George's extraordinary gesture spread rapidly through their ranks. Many of the security personnel had served for years feeling somewhat invisible and unappreciated, treated more as fixtures than as human beings with their own struggles and concerns. Seeing one of their colleagues treated with such obvious care and respect by a member of the royal family created a profound impact on morale and loyalty throughout the security team. Thomas's shift was scheduled to end in less than an hour, but the guard found that his emotional state had been transformed by Prince George's intervention. While his mother's illness remained unchanged and his personal crisis was far from resolved, the guard no longer felt overwhelmed by despair and isolation. The young prince's demonstration of caring had reminded Thomas that he was valued and supported, even during his darkest moments. Prince George began to walk slowly back toward the palace entrance, but his pace was different than when he had first entered the courtyard that morning. The young prince moved with a new sense of confidence and purpose, clearly proud of what he had accomplished but not in a boastful way. His satisfaction came from knowing that he had made a positive difference in someone's life, a feeling that would stay with him and influence his approach to leadership for years to come. Maria, who had been watching the entire scene unfold from her window, felt a mixture of pride and amazement at Prince George's maturity and compassion. The nanny realized that she had witnessed a defining moment in the young prince's development, an experience that would shape his understanding of leadership and responsibility for the rest of his life. The way Prince George had recognized another person's pain and responded with appropriate action demonstrated character traits that promised great things for his future role. The other palace staff who had gathered to observe the unusual scene began to disperse, but the impact of what they had witnessed continued to resonate throughout the building. Kitchen staff discussed the young prince's compassion as they prepared lunch. Housekeeping personnel shared their admiration for his maturity as they worked, and administrative staff reflected on the leadership qualities he had displayed as they went about their daily tasks. Word of the morning's events began to reach Prince George's parents, who received detailed reports from multiple sources about their son's extraordinary demonstration of empathy and emotional intelligence. Rather than being concerned about protocol violations or irregular behavior, they felt immense pride in Prince George's character and the way he had handled such a delicate situation with wisdom beyond his years. Thomas continued his guard duty for the remainder of his shift, but something fundamental had changed. The crushing weight of isolation and despair that had brought him to tears the previous night had been lifted, replaced by a sense of connection and support that made his burden feel manageable. The guard understood that he would still need to deal with his mother's illness and his own grief, but Prince George's gesture had reminded him that he didn't have to face these challenges entirely alone. As the unusual morning drew to a close, it became clear that Prince George's actions had created ripple effects that would extend far beyond the immediate participants. The young prince's demonstration of leadership through compassion had inspired everyone who witnessed it and had established new standards for how members of the royal family might interact with palace staff in moments of human need. 3 weeks later, Thomas stood at the same guard post where Prince George had offered him comfort during his darkest hour. The guard's life had changed dramatically since that memorable morning, but not in the way anyone might have expected. His mother had passed away peacefully just 5 days after Prince George's intervention, surrounded by family and free from pain. Thomas had been granted special leave to spend her final days at her bedside, a privilege that allowed him to say goodbye properly and provide the comfort she needed. During those precious final days with his mother, Thomas had shared the story of Prince George's compassion and had shown her the drawing the young prince had created. His mother, despite her weakness, had been deeply moved by the gesture and had asked Thomas to frame the artwork so that it could be displayed in their family home. She told her son that knowing a member of the royal family had cared enough to spend hours providing comfort during his time of need made her proud of the life he had chosen and the service he had given. The drawing now hung in Thomas's small apartment, carefully framed and positioned where he could see it every morning as he prepared for work. The artwork served as a daily reminder that even in the darkest moments, compassion and human connection could provide hope and healing. Thomas found that looking at Prince George's drawing each morning helped him approach his duties with renewed purpose and appreciation for the meaningful role he played in protecting the royal family. Prince George had continued his daily walks through the palace grounds, but his interactions with the guards had subtly evolved since that transformative morning. The young prince now made a point of acknowledging each guard with a respectful nod or quiet greeting, recognizing them as individuals rather than simply as uniformed fixtures. This small change in behavior had a profound impact on morale throughout the security team, who felt more valued and appreciated than ever before. Captain Williams had documented the events of that unusual morning in his official reports, but had framed them in terms of Prince George's emerging leadership qualities, rather than as a breach of protocol. The captain's analysis emphasized how the young prince had demonstrated emotional intelligence, compassion, and problem-solving skills that suggested great potential for his future role. The report had been circulated among senior palace staff and had contributed to discussions about how Prince George's education and preparation for leadership might be enhanced. The story of Prince George's compassionate intervention had spread beyond the palace walls, though the specific details had been kept confidential out of respect for Thomas's privacy. Palace staff shared carefully edited versions of the story with their families and friends, emphasizing the young prince's character and maturity while protecting the personal information about Thomas's situation. These accounts contributed to a growing reputation for Prince George as someone who possessed both intelligence and genuine caring for others. Thomas had requested a meeting with Prince George's parents to express his gratitude for their son's extraordinary kindness. During this private conversation, the guard had shared how profoundly the young prince's gesture had affected him, and had emphasized that Prince George's actions had helped him through the most difficult period of his life. Thomas's heartfelt testimony had reinforced his parents' pride in their son's character and had validated their approach to teaching him about compassion and service to others. The impact of that morning's events continued to influence daily life at Kensington Palace in subtle but meaningful ways. Staff members found themselves more aware of each other's well-being and more willing to offer support during difficult times. The young prince's example had demonstrated that acknowledging someone's humanity and offering comfort didn't require grand gestures or formal procedures, but could be accomplished through simple presence and genuine caring. Prince George himself had been profoundly affected by the experience of providing meaningful help to someone in need. The young prince had discovered that using his position and privileges to ease another person's suffering brought him deeper satisfaction than any formal ceremony or official recognition ever could. This understanding would shape his approach to royal duties for the rest of his life, emphasizing service and compassion over pomp and protocol. Maria, Prince George's nanny, had carefully documented the events of that remarkable morning and had included them in the detailed records she kept of the young prince's development. She recognized that future biographers and historians would want to understand the experiences that shaped Prince George's character, and this demonstration of mature compassion represented a pivotal moment in his growth as both a person and a future leader. Thomas continued to serve as a guard at Kensington Palace, but his relationship with his duties had been transformed by Prince George's intervention. The guard approached his work with renewed dedication and purpose, inspired by the young prince's example of leadership through compassion. Thomas often reflected on how a simple act of kindness had reminded him of the honor and meaning inherent in his service to the royal family. Years later, when Prince George had grown into his role as a leader, many people would point to this quiet morning in the palace courtyard as the moment when he first demonstrated the qualities that would define his approach to service and leadership. The young prince's instinctive understanding that true power lies in the ability to comfort and support others would become a cornerstone of his philosophy and would influence countless decisions. Throughout his life, the drawing that Prince George created that morning remained one of Thomas's most treasured possessions, a tangible reminder of a moment when someone had seen his pain and had chosen to respond with compassion rather than indifference. The artwork represented more than just a child's sketch. It symbolized the transformative power of human kindness and the profound impact that one person's caring can have on another's life during their darkest hour.